What is up, everybody? Clint Lamb with Cover Crimson. Let's talk a little bit about Jamarian Latham because that decision has been made. He has been granted an extra season of eligibility, and I think this is absolutely massive for Alabama's defense for a variety of reasons. And I've discussed it a little bit, but we're going to get into it even more because once again, I feel like this is a really, really big deal. Not enough people are probably going to appreciate just how big of a deal this is for Alabama's defense. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to get in here. Appreciate all you guys for being here. Appreciate you, Yo Rookie. The defense is going to be nice. Callie Cooper, completely agree. Thank you so much, Roll Tide, my friend. Thank you for being here. Let's roll. Let's see. Mimi's, I'm excited about his return. Let's hear it, sir. How do you think this impacts next season? All right, well, we'll go ahead and get into it. Once again, appreciate all you guys for being here. But Jamarian Matthews is getting an extra season of eligibility, and this is big. Why is this big? Because he is a very versatile, very underrated piece for Alabama's defense. Now, granted, he's not a dynamic player. He's not going to bolster, be this presence that's going to instantly bolster the pass rush productivity, at either your wolf position or your bandit position. He's not going to be this player who's a complete game wrecker for you as far as your defensive front, but he's a steady, reliable, experienced option. And the fact that he can play multiple positions, and Kane Womack, it was funny because I didn't see his quote initially, but I am seeing it now. And a lot of what I have thought about Latham, Womack is acknowledged at talking about the versatility. And so what he said about it is you feel the sense of urgency from Latham. They call it Zebo Latham. I don't think people realize how important Jamarian was to us a year ago. He can play our wolf. He can play our bandit position. He can play 3-tech in a pinch. And when we lost him, we lost a lot of backup depth and versatility that we would have loved to have had. You know what I mean? As we went into the rest of the season. So this is exactly why it's a big deal. Now, you have two wolves right now. I mean, you don't have a lot of, from a number standpoint, you got Jan Zapier coming back. You got Justin Hill coming back. At the top, you're in pretty good shape when it comes to that wolf position. It's a matter of numbers. And we've talked about maybe a guy like Xavier Griffin playing that spot. People have mentioned Des Zulu. It didn't really fit or make sense to me. I guess it still is a slight possibility. But with his skill set and stuff, he feels like a bandit. He's not going to be playing off the ball. Jamarian Latham, this is a guy who, was actually surprisingly comfortable playing off the football, doing a lot that is required of the wolf, which is why even at 278 pounds, which is what he was in 2024, they were willing in season to move him to wolf when they started getting short on numbers. Jahad Campbell was giving you some snaps there, but he had to be a permanent off-ball linebacker with Deontay Lawson with his knee injury. There was just a lot of circumstances that ended up happening. Q Robinson getting hurt roughly around the midway point of the season. Like just a lot of different factors kind of forced them to move Jamarian Latham to wolf, and he actually held up pretty well. So the thought process was, okay, what if we, had him lose weight, go from being 278 to maybe 260, 255 maybe, and just see if maybe he would actually be a very effective wolf for us. And granted, I think they got down to 262 pounds, so it wasn't anything significant, as far as like getting down into the same range as like a Quay Russaw or a Justin Hill or even a Jan Zapier, like in the 240 range. That's just not going to happen with a guy like Latham. But I do think that he moved better at a little bit of a lighter weight. But I kind of said, and this is something I want to continue to give credit when I remember who to get, properly attribute that credit to. Christian Miller was the one that initially brought this up, and I loved the thought process. And that was maybe he can go back to playing bandit. And when I was looking at that position, there's two different ways of looking at this. Number one, a number standpoint from the wolf side, I think he helps fill that void, gives you another option there, but also he has the ability to play bandit. And that is the more clear path to significant snaps, in my opinion. So does he play bandit? Does he play wolf? I think he plays both. I mean, why not give him an opportunity to play both? Maybe you split the difference there. If he was moving well at 278 pounds and doing enough where he could actually be contributing on the field for you at wolf in 2024, then him being 268 or 270, he can, he'll be able to move and stuff better at the, losing 8 to 10 pounds. And he should be able to hold up there if you needed him to play Wolf once again. But also, I think kind of getting him back up as far as his weight a little bit, he would also be a very viable bandit candidate for you. That's my thought process here. Now, granted, I wouldn't be shocked if in the spring, especially with, the fact that from a number standpoint, you're so short at Wolf, if they had him playing Wolf initially, and then if they're getting out of Des Zulu what they hope or expect, maybe they're trying out Devin Tompkins there and he's doing well at bandit, maybe they leave a guy like Jamarian Latham at Wolf. But if they're kind of struggling, this is now an option where you can say, okay, over the next X amount of months, we're going to put mass, and size back on him, and he'll end up being a guy who plays more bandit for us, who can also play Wolf if needed. People forget a couple of years ago, LT Overton's first season in Tuscaloosa, he did, I think, end up playing the most snaps at bandit because of, Latham having to make the move. But Latham was actually the starter at bandit for just about the entire season, or at least a huge chunk of the season. So he was Alabama's starter ahead of LT Overton, but Overton was obviously the more impactful player. But it's like this guy could end up playing that spot if you needed him to. So just from a number standpoint and the fact that he can kick inside some, play some 3 tech, that also brings a little bit of versatility to your defense. Back when Alabama had that cheetah package under Nick Saban, who was that fourth guy alongside Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner and Will Anderson, Latham was a guy that they like to use in those instances. He was a guy who would play a little bit even further inside, and he held up just fine. Now, granted, he was in that high 270s range, but I just really like how at this point in the offseason, at this point, as far as the guys who were available in the transfer portal, the options were limited, and I was becoming concerned, not from a top of the depth chart perspective. Alabama was going to be just fine at Wolf, and I thought, they do have some options at bandit. Cavante Henry is another one that I think could end up taking a big step forward and kind of becoming the player that a lot of people had hoped that he would. But at the same time, you are also concerned, okay, you need a starting option at bandit and you need a depth option at Wolf. These are two, what do they do? And you're looking at these options available in the transfer portal. And if Latham were to enter the transfer portal, then would he be like a world beater? Would he be a 4-star or a 5-star recruit? No, but he would be a player that could go help somebody else and be a rotational piece and be a very important piece from an experience standpoint. And the way that he's played in a lot of different positions, alignments, and different defensive schemes, he would be a valuable piece for somebody. And so the fact that Alabama essentially got a player that they weren't necessarily expecting back for an extra season of eligibility, and we talk about how much the experience and the age, and we talk about Indiana and how much success they had with that, you get a piece like this back, it's a big deal, guys. It's a much bigger deal than people realize. Not saying he's going to be a starter necessarily. I'm not saying he's going to be like one of the best or most impactful players in the defense. I just think he can help out your defense, and he really helps with the numbers. So I'm very excited about this news. Let's see. Danny, appreciate you for the comment. Going to show his importance later on in the playoffs, able to keep guys fresh and in the rotation. Absolutely. And we've already seen it a couple of years ago. There's a reason that Latham had to move from bandit to Wolf in the first place. And that was you started suffering some injuries. Now, some of that was at off-ball linebacker, and you had a versatile piece like Jahad Campbell who had to go, from being a player who could play Wolf to exclusively off-ball linebacker. And that's how it ended up happening. And as of right now, unless it's Xavier Griffin, they don't really have that type of player that they have to worry about that happening with. But you could always suffer injuries, multiple injuries at the Wolf position. And if that ends up happening, you now have Latham and you have a guy, like an Xavier Griffin who can step in and sort of shore up your depth a little bit, give you more options there if you really needed to, like emergency options. And so I absolutely love that. And I love it for, Latham. Like that's the other side of this that we definitely need to acknowledge. This is a guy who had a really rough time. I mean, it was a rough injury. I remember there being some concerns that it was career ending. And so just knowing that he's going to get that extra year of eligibility, and I still don't know how healthy he'll be. I don't know how great he'll look. It might take him some time. I mean, it was a serious injury. So I don't want to put unfair expectations on him, but just the fact that he's getting this opportunity, I love it for him, and I certainly love it for Alabama. Way off sides. Appreciate you being here, brother. Any idea how the rehab has gone since the injury? Haven't heard much. Still don't know exactly what happened. From my understanding, and I hate being wrong about injury related things, but from my understanding, I think it was something neck related, and I think it was pretty serious. But I also know that they wouldn't be pursuing another year of eligibility if, he wouldn't be able to play, if it was career ending. So that's encouraging. I don't have any sort of updates. In fact, I know that they were asking Kalen DeBoer a lot of questions, and we'll be getting into that here in just a minute. So maybe they were asked about where he's at with his health. I haven't seen anything on that front, or at least nothing that I've noticed. But once again, really, really big piece for Alabama's defense, especially at this point in the offseason. Now, when I say big piece, sometimes that gets misconstrued, and it's, you think everything's a big deal and everybody's a big piece and everybody's important. Well, I do think everybody's important. I don't want to be misconstrued, but I'm also not saying big as in this is as big of news as Yanze Pierre returning, not entering the NFL draft or not entering the transfer portal. I'm not trying to make those comparisons. It's big in the sense that I was very concerned about the depth, the numbers, and everything else at some of these positions. And I think he could potentially fill one of two roles, if not both roles in some ways for you. And that's, once again, maybe being a very important rotational piece, maybe even an outside chance of being the starter at Bandit, but then also filling the void and helping with numbers at Wolf. And maybe you do the same thing you did a couple of years ago, where if you needed him to move to Wolf, he could do that and at least get the job done. I just think it's they're heading in the right direction defensively. Really like how things are starting to come together. So let's see. Oh, by the way, I always forget to say this. If you want to be guaranteed to have your comment or question read and addressed on air, all you got to do is super chat. It's the thing that's going to separate it out for me, and I will be sure to get to every single one of those. Always do. Just want to go ahead and point that out. Let's see. As good as the Bob Camaro or Camano, I apologize for botching that. As good as the results were for our 2025 defense, I'm concerned about our run defense. Here's what I'll say to that. I am somewhat concerned because it's still not a sure thing, but I actually like how they've addressed a lot of their run defense question marks. The fact that you lost a guy like Tim Keenan, it's like, man, you're losing a big body nose, a guy who's 320 plus, 325 plus. In fact, at the Senior Bowl, I want to say he's 330 plus at just a tick under 6'2", which is exactly, I didn't think he was going to be checking in at 6'2" anyways. But, I mean, he's a very powerful, very difficult to move, a good block shedder, as far as being able to, get off of offensive linemen, the whole stack and shed thing, the two gapping when you ask him to do that, does all that stuff extremely effectively. And so I was kind of worried about that nose spot for Alabama, because while I do like London Simmons and I think he could hold up just fine there, I didn't like the idea of him being your starter at nose and being asked to kind of be or play. He was a lot bigger in high school, so he could always add mass, but I like where he's currently at. I think he's playing really good football. Would like to see him stay in that 300, 305 range. And, if he would have stayed at nose, then he probably would have been asked to add a little bit more mass. But then you end up adding a guy like Terrence Green, and that's a guy who's 330 pounds. He's 6'5". He's very powerful. Not going to have the natural leverage advantage that Tim Keenan did, but this guy's a very good run defender. In fact, I would say he offers next to nothing. I've said that many times. As far as your pass rush is concerned, he is being brought in to shore up or help shore up the run defense. Then I look at a guy like Kedrick Bingley-Jones, and I'm like, okay, where does this guy, what is his purpose? And being 200 or 320 pounds at 6'4", once again, I'll continue to reiterate, maybe he can handle some snaps as far as being further inside, but he's more of one of those play next to Terrence Green types at that 3-tech or in those 3-man fronts if you're asking for a zero technique nose and 2 4 eyes on the inside shoulder of the tackles. he would be one of those 4 eyes. And now you're shoring up or kind of helping out your B gap, or even in those 5 technique situations, your C gap run defense with a much bigger body. And I've said they used James Smith in that way a little bit this past season, especially as the season progressed. And they're no longer going to have James Smith. So Kedrick Beanley-Jones, I think he helps. And then I look at guys like London Simmons and I say, okay, this guy was a pretty effective, pretty good run defender when he was asked to play nose. So in any time you play nose or defensive tackle, either way, a majority of your snaps are going to come as like a 3-tech tackle. But it's just a matter of there are plenty of times where London Simmons was having to go further inside. And I actually like the idea of him more so being able to play a 3-tech and then go further out. So I think that helps your run defense. You're getting Jeremiah Beeman back, another bigger body guy. Think from a rotational standpoint, you're still going to have a good, solid number 2 as far as the run defense. Justin Hill, I was watching some tape on him earlier. Really good run defender, man. Really, really good. There was some inconsistency. You could tell that he didn't always know what he was doing or was very confident in what he was doing. But one thing that you could take to the bank is he gives a lot of effort and energy, and the natural power that he can generate at 242 or 243 pounds is spectacular. And I'm really excited to see what he ends up looking like as he continues to get bigger and stronger and more comfortable. I think that as far as the impact from a pass rushing perspective, that'll continue to evolve and improve. But the run defense is what he's kind of bringing to you from day one, or brought to you from day one. And I think he'll only continue to get better on that front. Yanze significantly improved as far as his run defense. The second level, we don't know exactly what to expect from the off-ball linebackers. Run fits are critical. They didn't always get great run fits the last couple of years. That's something that is going to be a TBD. But I think the guys up front, they've done a pretty good job because a guy like Devin Tompkins, he's another one that I should have mentioned before. You look at him and you say, okay, if you're asking him to be a full-time 3-tech or maybe even slide some a little bit further inside, he's a good run defender at times, but there's some inconsistency there. If you could allow him to play bandit and shift out quite a bit and then use him situationally inside, now his skill set, in my opinion, good run defender the further he goes out, and he can still provide that interior pass rushing presence. So that's another one that I like. Doesn't mean that all this stuff is going to come together and be what I'm saying or talking about. It's saying that I'm looking and I see the vision of how they're going to want to continue to stop the run. And I think that outside of giving up the chunk plays, and then, of course, going against Indiana, which Indiana ended up winning the national championship and being really good, overall, they were a pretty effective run defense. They just had a problem with once or twice a game, you give up a chunk, run, and, that was kind of a problem. So I'm hoping that they end up coming together as far as the run defense is concerned. But that's a fair concern and definitely worth addressing. I appreciate you saying that. Garrett Gaskin, appreciate the $19.99 super chat, brother. You support this channel consistently. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, man. That means the absolute world to me and us. I mean, it really, really does. Thank you so much, brother. I think Ja can help us at both positions. Maybe Des Zulu becomes that established pass rush threat, and Tompkins and Henry come along well at bandit. That gives Ja wiggle room to plug and play where he's needed. Exactly. And what I wouldn't do is go into the season just banking on Latham being a dude for you. Because he's coming off that serious injury, you can't just assume. And he could have quite a bit of rust to knock off. Like, how long did he have to go before he could get back in the weight room? Like, these are questions that I don't have answers to. I don't know that I'm going to get answers to them, at least not until the spring, where maybe you could ask, one of us could ask Latham straight up. But just having that option available as being a potential solution in both of those rooms, I think is really important. And it kind of gives you it's kind of like Des Zulu. Okay, that's a pretty experienced guy. Before, especially with me thinking that Devin Tompkins was going to play on the interior, I'm looking at the bandit room and I'm thinking, man, you're banking a lot on young freshman players. Like Jamarian Matthews is going to have to come in and be a dude for you. And I still think it's possible that he does come in and becomes that guy. But I think some of these moves or developments have positioned the freshmen where it's like, okay, if you come in and you win a job, it's not because Alabama had to have you. It's because you were good enough to get on the field and earn that job. A lot of the defensive players this past season, the freshmen, they got on the field through quality play. Now, a guy like London Simmons, yes, with Tim Keenan being injured early and then Jeremiah Beeman going down first game of the season, that forced a guy like Simmons into a more prominent role than I think anybody was expecting, and he handled it extremely well. But, you never want to be in a position where you're asking that of guys because not all of them will respond like London Simmons did. So just this type of move, this type of decision, it's kind of like earlier with Jimmy, I was talking about the cornerbacks and why I liked Carmelo O'Neal so much, because once Xavier Brown or Dijon Lee, if one of those two guys gets hurt, if O'Neal wasn't on the roster, you would have to decide between moving Red Morgan outside, which I don't like, or you'd have a redshirt freshman in Chuck McDonald or a trio of true freshmen that you would be asking to step into a starting role. I didn't like that. So what do? They go say, well, we'll add an experienced option who is going to have some transition coming from Mercer, and we're going to give him the opportunity to come in and help out from a depth standpoint, maybe be cornerback 3, while we give those young guys a chance to develop, and they're not pressed or forced into action. I love that. And they did the same thing with the defensive line, adding the guys like Des Zulu who can come in and potentially be an option, even if it's filling more of the Keon Keeley role, where it feels more situational before the injury struck. I'm completely fine with that. That's now a spot or an area that you've addressed, but it's another option. And getting Jamarian Latham back, I mean, it's another potential option at multiple positions. I love that. I would love it to be positioned where he can just slide in and do a lot of different things for you. But at this point, I do think you're going to see him at Wolf, and I think you're going to see him at Bandit. And I think it is possible, as Kane Womack mentioned, it is possible that you also see him situationally on the interior, especially if you had to have him or needed him there. He has that type of versatility. So I think that's really, really big. Appreciate you once again, Garrett, as always, brother. Let's see. Scott, hey, Clint, is this the young man with a neck injury? It is, yeah. And so I don't want to sit here and say, oh, he's going to be 100%. I don't know, but I just don't think you're pursuing this if there's any sort of risk or, I kind of last year, Deontay Lawson had the opportunity to go to the NFL. Then he suffers that devastating knee injury. And I kind of thought, okay, this is Alabama kind of giving him an opportunity of, hey, if you move on now, you're probably dropping quite a bit in the draft. No one's, as devastating as this injury is, no one's going to take you very high. And so I thought it was their chance saying, hey, why don't you use our facilities? We'll bring you back. But I was kind of concerned as far as what he would be able to do on the field. I thought it was more so just, hey, it's kind of doing one of your guys a solid and saying, you know what, come back for a year, rehab, you probably won't play much, but then you can test the NFL waters next year when you're healthy and can go through the combine. That's what I initially kind of thought. I just wasn't expecting early on in January of last year. I wasn't expecting a ton from Deontay Lawson. And then he ended up not only the conversation starts to shift to, well, he's going to be available, but how quickly will he be back to being himself? Will he be himself at any point in 2025? And then by week 1, he's back on the field. No, he's not himself, but he's kind of playing pretty much the same role that he played the entirety of the season. There was no easing him into it, and he held up okay. And then he got better and more, comfortable and back in a groove and a little bit healthier and stuff as the season progressed. I'm hoping for something similar from Latham. And I'm kind of now assuming that it's more of the Lawson approach. Maybe I'm wrong. And what I thought about Lawson last year is what Latham is this year. It's just, but he's not a guy who's probably, I'm sure he'll test the NFL waters when that opportunity comes, but he wasn't in the same position or isn't in the same position as Lawson. So I'm viewing it a little bit differently. I'll be curious to end up seeing how healthy he is once the spring rolls around. Maybe I'm being unfair and I'm setting him up for unfair expectations. I want to continue to make sure that everybody is being reasonable on that front. Jeremy Sanders, appreciate you being here, brother. Linebacker is going to have to come down and put ass to grass and not get pushed back. And at this point, I think QB Reese, he's a little bit undersized. He's barely over 220 pounds. I look at guys like Xavier Griffin, who's a potential option there, and it's like he needs to get add mass, get bigger and stronger, learn the system as well. Daryl Duke Johnson, he's one, needs to get bigger, needs to get stronger. You look at Caleb Woodson. I know he's 6'3", 230, but I think that he needs to continue to get bigger. I still don't think he's big enough. He's a lean 230 pounds, and I saw him get rolled out of there, on more than one occasion when he was at Virginia Tech, which is why I have some questions about, okay, I like the talent. I think if he hits, he's going to hit in a major, major way. But he's also not a guy that I'm just assuming this is one of your starting off-ball linebackers, 100%, no doubt about it. I'm not there with him yet. So I do, when you start looking across the board, I do have some concerns as far as the second-level run defense and how some of these guys fit. Now, what I will say is despite the fact that he's 220 pounds, I think QB Reese is a pretty good run defender. I think he's got a good feel for it. I think he does a good job of eluding blocks. He actually does a surprisingly good job as far as getting off of blocks. Now, granted, that was against lesser competition. I haven't seen him go against Vanderbilt or LSU or South Carolina, so maybe he gets against those types or those caliber of players and he's not nearly as effective at it, which wouldn't be a shock. But based off of what I've seen, he's better at getting off blocks than I would have thought for a 220-pound linebacker. Luke Metz is one that I just think he's going to help, guys. I think he's athletic. He's already been a big special teams contributor, but I think he's going to take the next step. And while I like Caden Jones and I like Caleb Woodson, and QB Reese is currently probably my favorite as far as guys who are going to contribute in 2026, because I don't think Xavier Griffin, I do think he contributes, don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, this is a guaranteed 2026 guy. Luke Metz is probably my second favorite of this entire group right now behind QB Reese. And then, of course, Xavier Griffin will probably jump instantly to number one whenever he finally gets, to a point where he's ready to contribute, whenever that is. But Metz is a guy that I like. He's 6'3", 230 as well, but I think he's got a little bit of a different build than Caleb Woodson. I also think he's a guy who's probably going to add bare minimum 5 pounds. I can see him being a 6'3", 235-pound linebacker. I can see him getting up to 240, but he can run. He can hit. From what I've seen, limited snaps, but what I watched in high school, lunch pail type of player. But while he brings a lot of the grittiness and nastiness that you look for, he also brings complementary athleticism, which is why I never really understood why he was a little bit lower rated. Like, I know I don't see any sort of elite athlete. I don't think he's got any sort of stupid good traits, but I just always thought, this is probably a guy who doesn't need to be a top 100 type of player, but he needs to be in like the 150 range, the 140, the 130, somewhere in there. I really felt like, based off of other guys who I've seen, that play that position, he felt more in that line, not a guy who was rated, I don't know, like definitely outside of the top 250, but maybe even closer to 300 or lower. That never made a whole lot of sense to me. Let's see. 5 Adam, appreciate you being here. Who would be starting offensive line? Right now, I think you're looking at Jackson Lloyd at left tackle. A lot of people are going with Javen James. I've seen some really good things from James. I've also seen some inconsistency. Now, granted, I would also expect some inconsistency from Jackson Lloyd. But, I think right now, the fact that he's familiar in the system, the fact that he's got a lot more, just pure talent from a recruiting standpoint, he was rated a lot higher. I'm higher on Jackson Lloyd. I think when it clicks for him, he's going to be really good because he plays with some nastiness. He's extremely athletic. I think he's an ideal left tackle. You could also play him on the right side, but I think that he can fit at left tackle in a Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb offense. So I'm going with him at left tackle right now. We'll have to wait and see. Some people want to put Ty Haywood there. Some people want to put Javen James. You could end up seeing either one of those, but I'm going with Jackson Lloyd. Left guard, Will Sanders has the lean to me, but Nick Brooks, the Texas transfer, I would put him in that conversation. Think he's going to be a part of that competition. Now, granted, it's also possible that they ask him to play tackle or want him to play tackle. He's got the length for it. I just think that he's a better fit on the interior. He played much better there when he moved inside for Texas, and I think that despite the fact that he's 6'7", that's probably where you want him, and he played left guard, quite a bit for them, so I would expect that to be the position that he plays at Alabama. Center, Rayson Delgatti, Caden Strayhorn, those are the top two, in my opinion. We'll have to wait and see who ends up winning that job. But it's a matter of, is Caden Strayhorn kind of ready to that year at Michigan and getting his feet wet with, a start against Texas in the bowl game? Is that enough for him to come into Tuscaloosa, learn a new system, and be ready to be a starter? Or is it Racing Delgatti, who's taking a major step up in competition? Does that end up happening? How quickly does that happen? I am leaning Racing Delgatti. I like him a lot. I think he's a very good player, and his skill set's going to transition to a much higher level of competition. So that's where I'm leaning currently. Also wouldn't rule out Caden Strayhorn, and it is possible that you get a Mal Waldrop or a Will Sanders in that mix at center as well. We'll have to wait and see. Right guard, I think that competition comes down to the 2 Michigan transfers. Ty Haywood, who, I've said this many times, but the fact that Javen James was added, you add an experienced option to compete with Jackson Lloyd. I think that allows you to move Ty Haywood inside, where I think the coaching staff likes him a little bit better. And I think he's good enough, or talented enough. He's not good enough. He hadn't proven it yet, but the upside is there enough where having a year in college, I'm leaning him winning that right guard competition. Now, granted, that's the one I'm probably the most uncertain about. It could be Caden Strayhorn. It could be Mal Waldrop. It could be, outside possibility. It could be Casey Poe. It could be a number of different guys. Maybe Nick Brooks goes over there to right guard. Maybe Will Sanders does because Nick Brooks is better at left guard. Number of different ways it could work out. But I'm leaning currently towards Ty Haywood. And at right tackle, that's the easy one. This conversation gets to end very quickly because it's probably, it's going to be Michael Carroll, assuming he doesn't make any sort of position change. So once again, these are early projections. It's still January, late January, but January nonetheless. And a lot's probably going to change. But based off of what I know about this group, which is not a ton other than just talent, that would be the direction or the route that I would take or think that it'll go. But I'm sure that will change quite a bit before that time actually gets here. Appreciate the question, though. It's a good question. Garrett Gaskin, I also think that a very underrated part of Alabama's defensive line is that we have very explosive 3 techs, Hill, Simmons, Fogg, and potentially Tompkins. I expect Green and Beeman to plug gaps as well. I agree. And, while, a guy like Faga, the one thing I'll say about him, he is a very explosive player. So you're 100% right. And he plays a lot of 3 tech. This is where things get confusing because I know what you're saying, and you're saying when he's playing that 3 tech, he's an explosive option there, and you're 100% correct. Like I said, the nose guys, they play a majority of their snaps at 3 tech. But I always kind of get it, I like to try to distinguish between the two. I'll typically say like a nose that's playing 3 tech because, when I think of 3 tech, I want to make sure people understand, once again, your nose is going to be that true interior 0-1 tech type. You could align them in different ways. It didn't have to be a 0 or a 1, but when you go in those 3-man fronts, he's going to be your true nose. Your defensive tackle, your 3 tech, typically they're going to kick a little bit further outside, and sometimes it's just a matter of going from a 3 over the guard to being a 4 eye on the inside shoulder of the tackle. And that's defending the same gap, essentially. So there's not a whole lot of change, maybe what you're asked to do from a responsibility standpoint. But, Faga, to me, doesn't really have the length where you want him playing further outside. I think when you start putting him over tackles and stuff, the length that tackles are going to bring to the table could give him issues. And so, he's listed at, I think, 6'2". Wouldn't be surprised if he was just a shade under, kind of like Tim Keenan. He does not have Tim Keenan's mass, so that's not as beneficial for him. And so, he kind of has to act as an undersized nose, but he does that very effectively. He's a good 3 tech. When you put him over a guard, that's fine. A lot of your guards are a little bit shorter. And when he's asked to play nose, yes, he can get rolled out of there. Yes, that size ends up hurting him at times. But overall, he's a very effective player who can be very disruptive with his explosiveness. And so I just went on a long way of saying, like Hill, he's a true 3 tech. He's going to kick further outside. I think Simmons now, true 3 tech. And, of course, Tompkins, he's going to be a true 3 tech, or he's going to be playing bandit. So I just wanted to distinguish between those two. Very good point by you. And it's got the potential to be a good defensive line. It's like all of these other spots. I can't tell you anything definitively. I have no idea how this stuff's going to come together, but I'm intrigued by the possibilities. I think they got some good pieces in place that can really make this a pretty effective unit. Is it going to have the depth and the impact at some of these spots, whether you're talking about the defensive line or the offensive line or, a number of other different positions that you need to win a national championship? I can't answer that question in January. I would lean right now that I think they're more of a playoff contender than a national championship contender. That doesn't mean that they can't compete for a national championship, but there's way too much uncertainty right now for me to sit here and say, oh, I know that they're going to compete for a national championship. I thought they were going to last year, and to an extent, maybe they did, but that's because I was a lot more confident in the offensive line with the experience coming back and the continuity there, and the fact that you had a guy like Ty Simpson, who I was very confident in. I loved the wide receiver room, the tight ends. I thought they were going to be fine with Josh Cuevas. I liked Jam Miller quite a bit. I liked the talent in that running back room. And a lot of this stuff I ended up being wrong about. Let's be 100% honest. I like the defense as well. But it's just, I was more so viewing that as I was discussing them as a national championship contending team. And just like I ended up kind of being wrong on that, maybe I'm wrong on this group, and it is a national championship contending team. But it's just it's not something that I'm going to run off that. I'm not going to run in that direction until they get on the field and they start giving me a reason to run in that direction. But I am excited about this group, and I am curious to see how a lot of these competitions, kind of start to play out. Let's see. PV. I think this is PV. I think I got, the one that's definitely PV. Appreciate you being here. Thoughts on Clem? What are the chances that we hire a second OL coach, and how do you think they would divide responsibilities? That's a really good question. Now, one of the things I did want to bring up before we get out of here is what Kalen DeBoer said, because he was asked about making an offensive line change. And this is what he said. He said it was about production. We know we got to be better there, mindset and just execution, the details and the fundamentals that the guys need. A lot of new faces that are going to be in that room. So kind of a fresh start there. And then later on, he said, I just think that there's a different avenues and directions that I was still thinking about going. And this is as far as there were some thoughts that maybe Cap would be retained. And there was even, I think there's been reports that Cap had been told he would be back. But I don't know if he had been told that definitively, and I don't know if he had been told that definitively by Kalen DeBoer, but this is, I think, his response to that. He said, I just think that there's different avenues and directions that I was still thinking about going, and it just became apparent to me what direction I was probably looking to go to as the week went on. And one of the things that he also mentioned, I'm not going to read every single quote that he had, but one of the things that stood out to me was he mentioned David Ballou and the strength and conditioning coach and the importance of having continuity there. It's the off season. Ballou is this is where he shines. This is where he's the most important. And I know a lot of people, because they feel like that Alabama wasn't strong enough and everything else in the season because they got pushed around at times. A lot of people are going to attribute that to your strength and conditioning coach. From a weight room perspective, getting their bodies in a place where they were physically strong, I actually think he did a pretty good job. And granted, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I've mentioned this multiple times, and I probably should actually go get the quotes, but I feel like that a lot of these guys were, a lot of them made like the freaks list, I forget his name and I apologize, but he does the freaks list every year. And, Jaden Roberts was one that made it. And Caden Proctor, I think, made it, if I'm not mistaken. Like, they had some guys who were kind of freak athletes, very, very strong, but they just didn't it didn't translate to the field. They didn't come with the physical the mental toughness mindset. They didn't play with an edge enough. Now, maybe you consider and say that's David Ballou's job. I think that's more of like where you fell short as far as the coaching, which, once again, we can sit here and blame Connor Talty all you want to. But when it actually came down to making a switch between kicker and long snapper, the coaching staff made a move at long snapper. They didn't at kicker, which kind of pointed me in the direction of they probably feel like the bigger issue was the long snapper. It's the same situation here. They felt like they needed to play with more of an edge and more toughness as far as the offensive line. They made a move with the offensive line coach, but based off of Kalen DeBoer's comments and the importance that David Ballou is going to play as far as the offseason and having continuity there where there's some familiarity, that makes me believe that David Ballou is not going anywhere. I could be wrong on that, but just I wanted to bring that up But it took me forever to actually get to your question. I go off on rants all the time. But as far as Clem is concerned, this guy is pretty tough. He gets after guys. Now, I've heard that Coach Cap is also, he's tough on his players and everything, but he's very kind off the field. He's a guy that I enjoy talking to or hearing him talk and do interviews and all those things. But I don't know if he had the edge himself. And I'm not trying to take a shot. I'm just speaking candidly. From what I've heard, Clem, he does have that edge, and we've heard about him kind of having some riffs. I mean, he had what's his name? Once again, what am I doing? Losing names here or forgetting names. The former Steelers offensive coordinator, who he had a lot of problems with, being difficult to work with or for. Cameron, man, I can't remember his name, but there was the reports of Clem and him having, they didn't mesh very well, and they ended up. Mike Tomlin went with his OC, kept him around, and got rid of Clem. And it wasn't really got rid of Clem, to be honest. It's just they allowed him to pursue another job because you're under contract, so they've got to give you permission. And the NFL, Mike Tomlin did give him permission to seek out another job, and he got with Oregon and Dan Lanning, and they're like, yeah, we'll gladly take you. We want that recruiting, like bring it on. But he's a tough guy, and he's not afraid to push back. I think in some ways, maybe Coach Cap, when it needed to happen, was afraid to push back. And so that's probably one of the things that I didn't mention the other day that I'm excited about with Clem, because sometimes, when there's one guy who's laser focused in on the way that he thinks it needs to be done, sometimes that's a good thing. But then sometimes you need to have a personality that can push back against that. I think Nick Saban had very select guys who would do that he trusted to do that. And I think those people were very important to kind of give a different side of it where there's a level of respect. And I think that Clem, he is probably going to provide some sort of version of that I think is going to be beneficial for Alabama. As far as your question about the second offensive line coach, I don't know. I know that had been reported, and that's a possibility. I haven't heard anybody connected. And I think initially, if I had to guess, because the way Kalen DeBoer was talking and there was different ways that we could take this, I think maybe the second offensive line coach could have been, well, if we keep Coach Cap, we need to take some stuff off of Coach Cap's plate. We need to bring in maybe more of that edgier guy, someone to complement or help that group out if they chose to stick with Cap. Maybe the thought process for Adrian Clem was, I'm not coming to being an assistant offensive line coach. Like he really, I know a lot of people were like, oh, he was a USC, analyst. No, this is a pretty big name guy. And I don't think enough people realize that. And he's done some pretty good work. And so, I wouldn't be shocked if he was like, I don't want to be the assistant. And they're sitting there looking, this guy can help us. This guy can really help us. And maybe that's the why they ultimately ended up going in a different direction. Maybe the thought with the second offensive line coach was strictly if they kept Coach Cap. Now that they've hired somebody else, maybe they don't, or maybe they do. It could go either way. Just wanted to point that out and at least give more context for people. J Mal, appreciate the $4.99 super chat. Still think we should go after another edge rusher at either Bandit or Wolf. Maybe a guy from the lower ranks, but two good elite edge rushers are the way. Look, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. And I think you're onto something here. Even though you're getting Jamarian Latham back, having 4 Wolves wouldn't be the worst thing. In fact, having 3 true Wolves, and then you allow Jamarian Latham to be a guy who added a 4th, but then also was able to kind of be a little bit flexible and play different positions. I think that would be the best route to go. Will they do that? I don't know. But I don't think they're, at this point, I'm not looking at anybody in the transfer portal that I've noticed, and I've tried to do some deep dives. It's slim pickings. A lot of these guys have been paid. They're off the board. And so you're looking, and maybe you can end up finding a diamond in the rough. And I'm sure they're combing through all these players. There's still a ton in the transfer portal trying to find that guy or those guys. That's going to take time. Once if they elect to do that and they identify a player and that name emerges and I can kind of focus in on somebody, I'll go dive in and I'll try to tell you what I think about them, and others will do the same. But at this point, I more so am saying or thinking it's probably a guy you bring in from a number standpoint. Maybe he does have some upside, but you're not expecting him to come in and be a second, elite edge or good edge. I don't think there's any starting caliber players that I know of right now at that position in the transfer portal. So it would be more from a numbers standpoint. And maybe you end up hitting on that guy. It's a lower rated player, but he makes the step up and now you've got it. And that's great. Just don't think that that's like how it should be like viewed by fans. Still go get this player, because those players at this point, they're not really out there. Appreciate the super chat though. Garrett Gaskin, appreciate the $9.99 super chat. Completely agree about the Faga point of view, Clint. Have you had a chance to look at the names coming to Junior Day this year? Any new names to look out for? Here's the thing. No, I have not. And from a recruiting standpoint, for so long, my thought process was I worry about the guys who are on the roster, and I worry about the guys who, once they sign or commit, I'll go look at a commitment. If this is a guy who pledges, even though there's a very good likely or chance that he'll choose to decommit and go elsewhere, I'll go look and share my thoughts. That started to change this year. I'm being more proactive and kind of looking at the board and how it lays out and different guys they're targeting. But just with everything that's been going on with the transfer portal and the amount of film I've been watching on the returning guys, I'm not the one at this point that is like putting together the board. I go look at the board that other people have put together, and then they give me direction, and then I start watching film and collecting thoughts, and I'll share those thoughts and everything else. So the reason I'm saying that is the Junior Day for me has not been a huge focus, even though I'm going to look at the Junior Day list, start collecting that, and then properly preparing where I can start explaining my thoughts on some of these guys and keep you guys in the know. Because it's not like we're not touching recruiting. It's just that's kind of a new side of it for me. And it's just going to take me a little bit of time to kind of get back into that groove as far as the recruiting. I do love it, though. I loved doing it last year. I love looking at this class and the different guys they had. This is what made me really passionate about football. I've always tell people when I was a ninth grader in high school, me and William Ming, who ended up playing at Alabama, we were best friends. We had business tech essentials together, and we used to get in trouble all the time. We didn't have cell phones and all that. This was freshman year, would have been what, 05 maybe, I believe. Yeah, 2005. So we didn't have cell phone. I think we had maybe flip phones, but we would get on the computer all the time, and we'd sneak off over to rivals. We'd look up Rolando McClain stuff, and we had a teammate, Alfred McCullough, who was getting recruited and courted by everybody, and this, that, or the other. But me and him loved it, and we became super passionate and obsessed with it. And then once I went to college myself, didn't end up going to Alabama myself, then things started to kind of I became more focused on the team side of it. And it hadn't been until recently where I really started getting back into actually knowing all the different recruits and all of that. It's a lot of information to know, but I very much had fun last year keeping up with it and sharing my thoughts and adding what I feel like I, hopefully bring to the table for you guys. So that will continue. Long-winded way of saying that, but that's kind of my approach moving forward. Matt, Canada, thank you. I can't want to say Cameron something, and it's Canada Cameron. That's what it was, but I couldn't get off of. And maybe Cameron kept, I don't know, but thank you so much for, that was bothering me. King Mario, have you watched tape on Ha-Ha's little brother? He's a linebacker, right? I watched a little bit. I need to go watch more. He plays like a dog. From what I've seen, it's just, I don't think he's overly big, if I'm not mistaken. So there's some size concerns. But, you don't know how it's going to translate from that level. And even if it doesn't translate where he's not that dude on this level, which I wouldn't expect, but he can still help out your football team and still help out your depth. I would love that addition. I think just for, even if he's, like Drake Kirkpatrick Jr., even being a guy before he became like a contributor. And this is another thing too that I'll say. No one really thought a whole lot of Drake Kirkpatrick Jr. as a high school prospect. He was a very low rated he was one of the lowest rated 3 stars in Alabama's class. And everybody's like, well, we love that this is Dre's kid and makes everybody feel old and gets to play for Saban as well. But as far as expecting this guy to ever come in and be anything, major, at least not from my point of view, and maybe that was wrong of me, also wasn't keeping up extensively with high school recruiting. I was paying attention to the rankings a little too much. But he's actually turned into a good player and a player who could actually end up helping Alabama out, not just on special teams, but on defense. So maybe Ha-Ha's brother is the exact same way because Dre Jr. is a dog. He plays with that edginess, and it seems like this guy does too. I don't know how it'll translate, but the more players you got like that are just play with a chip on their shoulder, playing like they have something to prove, I'm telling you, I think that makes a huge difference for your football team, and those are the kind of guys you love to have. So, haven't watched a ton of tape of him yet. We'll certainly watch a lot more if he ends up committing to Alabama, but I also haven't heard too much about him recently. Joe Edwards, Clint, do you think DeBoer is changing special teams coach? I don't know. That would be the direction that I would lean. It's the same thing I said for the offensive line. Look, I don't know how you look at the offensive line and you say, hey, we need sweeping changes to that room, and we need sweeping changes as far as the man leading that room. That made sense based off of what I saw from Alabama's offensive line this year, and to an extent what I saw from Alabama's offensive line last year. I don't know how you look at special teams or specialists in particular, but really you can expand it to special teams and say, well, we're going to get a new kicker. We're going to add competition there. We're going to add another punter, and we're going to add a long snapper. That's you essentially saying we understand that the special teams was not where it needed to be. And then look at the coach and say, well, but this is different than the offensive line. We don't need sweeping changes there. That would be conflicting to me. So if that's the approach with your offensive line coach or your offensive line, I think the same logic should be applied to the special teams, because it fell short, across the board. Tell me where they were really productive or really consistent. There was some inconsistency as far as punt coverage, as far as kick coverage. There was some inconsistency as far as punt returns, and you ended up having some botched plays on punt returns. You ended up having guys who were taking out kickoffs that they didn't need to and putting you in bad field position, especially at critical moments in the game where the defense or the opposing team had just captured some momentum, and you allowed them to stack on that by getting a big lick on you. And now you got the football at the 14 or the 15-yard line. Like, I'm looking at this and I'm saying just across the board, it was all bad. Punting was inconsistent. Kicking was inconsistent until very, very late. You had to bench your long snapper. I mean, why would you not? And once again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not trying to attack anybody. I'm just telling you what I really think. And I think they fell so short of expectations on special teams that a move needs to be made. Will they? I don't know. And if they don't, I'm going to continue to support the coach. I'm not going to agree with the decision, but I will say, okay, you see something that I don't. You probably know more than me. We'll see how it looks. But the same thing I said with the offensive line is the same logic I'm going to apply with the special teams. That's fine. Just be right. Because if you're wrong, I'm going to be sitting here on this channel talking to you guys saying, we kind of all saw it. Something needed to happen. And now there's a very critical phase of this game that Alabama is still losing on a week-to-week basis. And it's causing them to, or it's preventing them from winning football games. And in some ways, causing them to lose football games. So I'm just saying they can do whatever they want to do, but I will also react accordingly. I will say that I don't agree with if they elect to not make any changes. We'll see what it ends up looking like. We'll find out, I guess. Let's see. Alabama Poe, did you hear the interview Coach KD just did? No, I didn't hear it. It's down at the Senior Bowl. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier when I was reading all these quotes. He's at the Senior Bowl supporting his guys. So was Kane Womack. And obviously got in front of the media and was asked some questions. I didn't see it. I'm actually looking forward to going to watch it. I saw the Latham news. That was big. And I'm like, I want to get on here and discuss all this. And now we end up going an hour. Told the wife I wasn't going an hour. I get it. I do this all the time. But I love being on here with you guys. And I love talking about this stuff. I think about it 24/7. Not just because it's my job, but I mean, I go to bed at night and I'm thinking of different. I don't know. I'm a psycho when it comes to this stuff, but no, I haven't had a chance to see it. I was very excited to get on here and talk about Latham because I feel like that was very important. And I saw the quotes that Bama Online wrote up about, him talking about the offensive line coaching change and that stuff. So I'll have to go wait and see. But that just gives us another topic or more topics for tomorrow's show, which we will absolutely be having. And hopefully it's enough for me to go live. I like going live with you guys. I like having the live reactions. I love what I do with Jimmy and EG and Solo, but I love jumping on here and actually discussing things with you guys. So probably will be going live tomorrow too. Let's see. FX King, do you think our linebackers are in a good place going into 2026? I've said this. I'll continue to say it. They must be, because the coaching staff, think about how this all played out. I had concerns about the off-ball linebacker room just from an experience standpoint. Liked a lot of the options in there, but we just didn't know a whole lot about it. And I come from the Nick Saban approach, which is, hey, you've got Jahad Campbell. You've got some other really good young players, Sean Murphy, a former top 100 recruit. And it's like, okay, this guy, X guy moved on. Jalen Moody moved on. This just clears the path for a very talented player like Jahad Campbell to step in. Nick Saban's approach was always, yeah, but I don't want to just bank on that. So we bring in Trez Marshall, and he actually ends up platooning with Trez Marshall. And Marshall ends up playing, was definitely the starter at the beginning of the season. So that was just always his approach. Like he wanted the veteran, experienced player. And then if the young player overtook that guy and just was clearly better, okay, that's fine. But he never wanted to bank on it. He always wanted to have those options. So I'm used to that. Now, granted, you can make an argument that is Caleb Woodson in this, because as soon as the portal opened up, there were like a handful of guys, Devin Tompkins, Hollywood Smothers. There were at least 3 or 4 guys that they were pretty quickly connected to. Caleb Woodson is a guy that they got on campus very quickly. They got him signed very quickly. And I know that there was a couple of programs that wanted their shot at Caleb Woodson. Now, I turn on the tape and I have my questions. I think he's got a lot of upside and a lot of talent. I'm not down on him by any means, but I just don't see a surefire, bona fide starter at off-ball linebacker. I see another strong, intriguing option at that position. But they got him locked up, and then off-ball linebacker went quiet. You didn't see him connected to anybody. And you had people like me and a lot of other content creators covering Alabama talking about that position and how we think they should go after, somebody. And we were listing potential options. Connected to essentially nobody. Definitely didn't bring anybody else in. Now, granted, the connection to HaHa's little brother, yes, that does count. But I mean the guys, the Nikai Hill Green caliber transfer portal guys at the top. That's something that we just really didn't see them connected to anybody. Arian Carter was a guy that I really wanted them to go after. A lot of fans did. They didn't. I think there's a reason for that. And I think that is the coaching staff telling us, y'all don't see these guys, but we got some dudes. Now I'm trying to look and try to identify and figure out, now what dudes do you got? I'm trying to decipher. And because I guarantee you it's not a room just full of studs. There's probably 1 or 2 guys that mix with Caleb Woodson they feel really good about. And maybe they feel really good about their future with Xavier Griffin. They feel like you don't want to put too many obstacles in his way, because you probably feel like he's a guy who's going to come in and immediately contribute in some form or fashion, even if it's in a depth role, but then maybe could end up being a player or a dude for you over the course of his freshman season. I just don't know who those guys are. My guess, Jimmy and I discussed this earlier, he said that he kind of is predicting that it'll be Caden Jones and Caleb Woodson as the 2 starters. It was funny because we normally are in complete agreement, but if I had to guess today, I would say it would be QB Reese and Luke Metz. I really like both those guys. I love the 2 that Jimmy mentioned too, and just not quite as much. And once again, I'm not setting that. Caden Jones could end up being linebacker 1 and being a damn good one, or Caleb Woodson can end up being that dude. But the coaching staff, they will send you signals if you know where to look. And one of them, in my opinion, is we feel good about the off-ball linebacker room. And so I'm excited to see how that ends up working out. I think that means it's probably in a good place, or maybe that also means the coaching staff is not properly evaluating, which also is a possibility, but I'm encouraged about it. Raymer Jammer, Alex Latham at Bandit. What do you think, Clint? Yes, I've talked about that. I agree. I think that is a strong possibility. Think he's going to play Wolf to start out, if I'm not mistaken. Now, granted, if they are waiting until they have more established options at Bandit, because that's the spot that has a starter in question, maybe he does start off at Bandit. I think right now, from a number standpoint, you probably put him at Wolf. You give those other guys a chance to kind of see who's doing well, who could end up playing Bandit, who could be your starter and the key rotational piece, maybe your depth. And then if you don't feel great about where that position is at exiting the spring, maybe you say, okay, now let's put some mass back on Jamarian Latham. Let's get him ready. We know he started at this position for us in the past. We know he can play it pretty well. Let's give him the opportunity to move back there. We've got several months to put some weight back on him, and let's get him ready for that. And then, you know, if you had to move him back to Wolf because you had injuries and stuff, you saw Latham play at 278 pounds at Wolf a couple of years ago when they were forced to move him there due to injuries and everything else. And he did okay. He did, you know, pretty decently well. So that's how I'm viewing it right now. We'll have to wait and see, but that's where we're at this point. Oh, Alabama Poe. Coach KD said in the interview he was real excited about the linebacker room. That's encouraging. These are the types of things that I love hearing. I love reading. I think that it's an intriguing bunch. I do. I have my questions about it. Like I look at QB Reese and I'm like, this dude, he can ball, guys. I mean, he's got a lot of the traits that you look for, and he's not big. He's not, super strong. He's not like this elite athlete. I think he's a good athlete. He does do a good job as far as shedding blocks and stuff like that. But I mean, he's one of those guys that I look at. I'm like, you shouldn't be this good, but you're pretty good from what I've seen. And maybe we're just scratching the surface here. I mean, let me go ahead and I think I got it right here. Just something that I noticed, thought it was interesting. QB Reese played 47 snaps this year, and he had 5 stops. Now, a stop, according to Pro Football Focus, is a play that constitutes as a failure for the offense. So kind of, if it's a run that goes for 0 yards, or I don't know exactly what constitutes as a failure to them, but it's not a tackle for loss because it's his own thing. So it's a play that is just a failure. If the offense is trying to get 3 or 4 or 5 yards on a run and you stop them for no gain, they kind of track that. So he had 5 on just 47 snaps. That is an average of 1 every 9.4 snaps played. Now, I went and because I'm a psycho, I went and looked at the last 10 years for Alabama and got this, how many snaps each guy took, and that includes starters and depth options. Because it's easier from a depth standpoint if you come in at the end of a game and you're playing against a clearly inferior opponent and they're kind of running the football trying to get out of there, you're going to have some opportunities to get some quote unquote stops. So it's actually easier to have a lower, a higher percentage of stops via, how many snaps you play if, you're in those obvious run situations. So a lot of times, like Caden Jones the year before, he had 4 stops on 30 snaps. That's 1 every 7.5 snaps. But I will say QB Reese led the team in 2025 as far as having 5 on just 47. That 9.4 average was the highest in the linebacker room. And for comparison, like Deontay Lawson was at 16.7. That means every 16.7 snaps that he played, he had 1 stop. Justin Jefferson was at 17.5. Nakai Hill-Green was at 17.3. Caden Jones was at 13.3. And Luke Metz was at 11.5. And so, you look at that, you compare it to the others, and I realize, okay, this is a pretty common theme. But I just found that fascinating because I ended up posting. I talked about him earlier. We created a clip out of it, and I had to go pull some of the QB Reese highlights that I saw, and I just was looking through them, and I think there's 4 or 5 plays. I'm like, man, this dude, he just makes plays, man. He's got a great feel for playing the position. So I'm excited. I'm excited about Reese. I'm excited about Jones. Really excited about Metz. I like the entire room. I really do. So, all right, that's going to do it. Over an hour. Oh, good heavens, man. This happens every time. Appreciate all you guys for tuning in. You guys make it very easy to run with a lot of this stuff. Going to let that comment go. Todd World Order. I'm not going to address in that. But I appreciate all you guys for being here. We appreciate the support. Love doing this. Love you guys. If you haven't already, get on over to rowback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your order, and we will talk to you guys soon.